We are now less than 100 days out from the US election in November, and it is nearly time for Kamala Harris to pick her vice presidential candidate. We are expecting an announcement any day now, and so today we wanted to go through who some of the top contenders are. What exactly is Harris looking for, and what kind of difference to her campaign is she hoping a vice presidential pick could make?
Billi, I want to start quite broad here. What will Kamala Harris be looking for in a vice president?
So I think there are two main things that experts are saying Harris will want, and she obviously knows quite a bit about this because she is the vice president. So the first is for the person to be from a battleground state, which is also known as a swing state, and that's basically just any state in the US that could be won by either the Democratic or Republican candidate each election. So if you look through history, that it's gone either way throughout the elections. So there are states that are safe states. For example, California is a pretty solid Democratic state at the national
where Harris is
level.
from.
Yes. But there are also swing states, like I said, where each election, it really could go either way, Republican or Democrat. Now, some of the key ones are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So when it comes to November 5, when the election is, you'll be hearing a lot about those states. And those are the states where Harris and Trump will be doing a lot of their campaigning in the lead up to the election. So that's the first thing she'll be looking for, someone who is popular in one of those key swing states and will help her win those states. The second thing that I've seen a lot of reporting on is that Harris might be looking for a vice president who can quote unquote balance the voting paper.
And what does that mean?
So as we know, if elected, Kamala Harris will be the first Black American woman and the first South Asian American to be elected president. And what a lot of commentators are saying is that to appeal to more conservative voters, as we know, there's a big discussion about whether America is ready for someone like Kamala Harris. So to appeal to more conservative voters, possibly she will pick a white man to quote unquote balance the ticket. Another way that can be interpreted is that there has been also a lot of criticism from Trump calling Kamala Harris a radical and saying she's way too left. Obviously, she disagrees with that, but she might consider picking a vice presidential candidate who is more moderate than her to appeal to swing voters. And those are people who aren't tied to a party and aren't yet sure who they will vote for.
Going back to the fact that she was Joe Biden's vice president, or still is Joe Biden's vice president, it's almost what she did for him.
Yeah.
He was a white man who was deemed to be this kind of moderate Democrat, and he brought on Kamala Harris, who was a Black woman who appealed to, again, that left voter base. And it's interesting now that she's doing exactly the same thing
just the other way.
Exactly, for her VP. So on that topic, who are the strong contenders that might be in the running for VP here?
So I'd say that there are three main top contenders that are being thrown around, and all of them are, no surprise, men.
So let's go through each of those.
So the first one is Mark Kelly, who is an Arizona senator. And remember, Arizona is one of those key swing states that I mentioned before.
So tick there.
Yes. And so they were actually one of the key states that helped Biden win in 2020. Now, a few things to know about Mark Kelly. Fun fact, he's actually a former astronaut for NASA.
Oh.
He's been to space.
Well, there you go.
But
that is a fun fact.
But I'll get to the politics. So he is particularly strong on campaigning for stricter gun control. And that comes after his wife, who is a fellow politician, but who is now retired. Her name is Gabby Giffords. She survived an assassination attempt in 2011. Now, he is seen as a moderate, which, as we said before, is possibly what she could be looking for. He has a bit of a reputation for working across the aisle on policies, so working with Republicans on some policies. He's also particularly strong on immigration. He believes that Democrats should adopt a tougher stance on border issues, which we know is one of the key issues in this election that Trump has been really attacking Democrats on. He's especially strong on this because Arizona has a border with Mexico.
Okay, so that's Mark Kelly. Who else are we looking at here?
The next one is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He has been the governor of Minnesota since 2019. Now, Minnesota isn't really considered a swing state. In fact, the last Republican to win Minnesota was Richard Nixon in 1972. But importantly, it is somewhat considered to still be competitive and somewhat of a swing state because Trump is saying that he plans, in fact, he says that he promises to win Minnesota, and he has still been visiting the state for campaign. So there's definitely still some competition there. And one other thing to note about Walz is that he has gained a lot of attention recently after he called Trump and JD Vance quote unquote weird.
These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away. They want to be in your exam room. That's what it comes down to. And don't, get sugarcoating this. These are weird ideas.
Now, you might have heard this around because it's kind of this new strategy that a lot of Democrats are adopting of calling Trump and Vance weird. And it's really created this shift in how the Democrats are talking about them. So just to give you an example of this shift. So in 2016, Hillary Clinton, who was then the Democratic candidate, she used the word deplorable a lot to describe Trump. Obviously, we know that that didn't work. And so there's this shift to now just calling them simply weird.
It is almost Trumpian. Like that's what Donald Trump does. He calls them one word and fixates on that. And now the Democrats are using that in their own campaigning.
Yeah, and they're really using it a lot. A number of high-profile Democrats have been adopting the language, including Kamala Harris. One other thing to note about Walz is that he was the governor of Minnesota at the time of the murder of George Floyd by police in 2020. And Walz has been criticised quite a bit for his response to the protests that occurred after that murder. And there has been criticism that he didn't do enough to prevent the damage that followed.
It's really interesting. And so we've got these two men so far. Who is the third contender?
The third is the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Now, Pennsylvania is one of the really, really important swing states. It is an absolute must-win. When Election Day rolls around, you'll be hearing about Pennsylvania a lot. So Josh Shapiro, he rose to prominence when he beat his Republican opponent by a significant margin in 2022 in the race for governor. He's often praised, I saw this so much when I was researching this, he's often praised for overseeing a quick repair of a bridge that collapsed last year. And just generally, he has really quite relatively strong approval ratings in Pennsylvania, which again is a must-win for Harris this election. If Harris does pick Shapiro and then they go on to win in November, he would be the first Jewish vice president of the US. And I'll also add that he has voiced strong support for Israel in the war in Gaza.
Are there any other names being mentioned, or is it just the three that you've spoken about?
No, there are so many other options. Also, this week we've had two high-profile candidates dropping out. There are so many names going around in this podcast, so I won't go through them. But just two others to quickly mention. There's Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. Now, Kentucky is actually a pretty safe Republican state. So the fact that he's a Democratic governor has always been seen as quite impressive and potentially something that Kamala Harris might be attracted to. And then there's also Pete Buttigieg, who is currently the Secretary of Transportation under the Biden administration. So he has worked with Kamala Harris in that role. He's quite often seen as one of the most effective communicators from the Democratic Party.
He has been everywhere. They have really wheeled him out in the last couple of days and he's been everywhere.
Yeah, he's really doing the media rounds at the moment. If he is picked, he would be the first openly gay person to be nominated for vice president. Like I said, there's a whole list of other potential ones. I would say those are the 5 of the current front runners. And I'm sure no matter what, we will likely be hearing those names come up as future Democratic presidential candidates in either 2028 or 2032.
I think that this is always a really interesting process. As you said, it identifies who the up-and-coming stars are. And from here, it's hard to tell. So it's good to kind of get that straight from the source. When are we expecting to hear from Harris about who she'll pick?
We know it will be in the next few days. So Harris's campaign has told media outlets that her first rally with whoever the new vice presidential nominee will be next Tuesday. So she's planning to go to a rally with the vice presidential pick on Tuesday. So it'll be quite soon.
Okay, and just quickly before we go, Billi, the last time we did an episode on the US was just when Biden had dropped out. So much has happened since then. A day is like a year in US politics. Can you give us a sense of what else has happened with Kamala Harris's campaign since that last episode we did?
Yeah, I think at the time of that episode being recorded, it wasn't even certain yet if Kamala Harris would definitely be the Democratic nominee. Now it definitely is certain. She has definitely gained enough support, and there's been this significant shift in, the Democratic Party really uniting and getting around her. She has actually raised $200 million in the week since she became the Democratic presidential candidate, and that is more than Biden raised in the first 3 months of the year. So you compare 1 week to 3 months, that really gives you an idea of just this shift that we've seen. And she's also signed up 170,000 new volunteers for her campaign. So that's been quite positive for her. The campaign has, though, as we have likely expected, it has become quite ugly. Yesterday, Trump questioned Kamala Harris's racial identity while speaking at a convention for Black journalists. He basically said that she has only become a Black person recently.
She was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was Black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn Black, and now she wants to be known as Black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she Black?
She has always identified as a Black woman. She went to a historically Black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't.
Just to be clear, Harris's mother was born in India and her father was born in Jamaica, and her official White House profile says she's the first Black American and the first South Asian American to be elected to the position of Vice President.
And just on the topic of Donald Trump, what's the latest with him?
So Trump has continued his campaigning. He has obviously ramped up his attacks on Kamala Harris since she became the Democratic candidate. And as we just heard, he has started questioning her racial identity, which has been making a lot of headlines. The polls, though, they show that Trump is still ahead in this race. So the latest New York Times poll shows that Trump leads Harris by 1 point, although she has tightened the gap with Trump compared to when Biden was the Democratic nominee, but Trump is still ahead.
Certainly one that we will be keeping a keen eye on, and can't wait to see who Kamala Harris picks as her VP as we go through another twist and turn of this election cycle. Now, before we go, we just wanted to shout out all the wonderful episodes that we have covered this week on the Daily Aus. So it's been quite an array of topics here. We've had a deep dive into tourism, but most importantly, over-tourism. Then we had the latest on Hezbollah and Israel. We had another episode on Rex, the airline that has gone into voluntary administration this week. And yesterday we covered off on the government's response to the Disability Royal Commission, with Harry answering whether anything will change for Australians with disabilities. We will throw all of those links in today's show notes. Thank you for supporting the Daily Aus. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back again on Monday.